I'm glad that you all said the energy was high, even though the volume was low. So let's hope that changes. So once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for choosing to be here. I know there are other sessions happening, so I really appreciate you taking the time and choosing to be here with us. So, as I was preparing for the session earlier on today, my first thought was don't get curry on your shirt, because that would look pretty bad, which I've successfully managed to do. So well begun, half done, I guess. But more importantly, as I was preparing for the session, I thought if I was asked to come into one of those sessions, or rather if I was choosing to participate in one of these sessions, I would have a few questions, things that I would want answers to. So I thought I'd made a list of questions that I thought you might have, and I thought I would begin with those in mind. So you may be wondering, what is this session about? Although Aditya just gave us a little bit of a brief. You may be wondering, what are we going to be doing over the next 45 minutes? I thought you may want to know who is Vivek and what is Wilson Learning, both of which were already answered by Aditya. And I thought you might want to know if I'm going to bore you. Well, let me start by answering the final question first. I don't know that. I sincerely hope I don't bore you. But we have a lot of interesting information and research to share with you. And I think as L&D practitioners, you will find this bit of information quite useful. We also are going to get you to do some exercises as we go along. Not very extensive, given that we have a limited amount of time and a lot of information to share, but we will have some activities that we will definitely do. So let's start by answering the first question, which is, what is this session about? So the purpose of today's session is to answer a pressing question that is on your minds and on the minds of your businesses, and are probably getting asked a lot from you. And that is, what is the best way to drive business impact through learning strategy? We will help you answer this question by sharing some tools for having better, more impactful discussions with your business. We will provide you with a proven framework that we have been using for many years to help structure your approach to creating better business impact. We will also share some research that we've done around what are the key activities that drive better business impact from a learning intervention. And we will also share some success stories that we might have as best practices from implementations that we have done both here in India and globally. And finally, we will also give you an audit that will help you evaluate any particular learning intervention that you are doing in your own organization against these parameters to get sort of a score to tell you how well you have been planning that in regards to driving these business outcomes. What the audit also does is acts as a document for you to have better conversations internally with your own teams going forward about what are some of the things that you can do as you continue, right? But as I said before you do that, at the end of this session, we hope that we can create an opportunity for you as L&D professionals to drive better business results for the businesses that you work with and support. But as I said before I do all of that, this is a post-lunch session, so I thought I'd get you to do a little bit of activity, right? I think I need it as much as you do. So can I ask everyone to please stand up? Now, if you've seen this, work with me, humor me, and continue. If not, let's talk a little bit about this. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to raise your dominant hand, right or left hand, doesn't matter, and point your index finger to the roof, or the ceiling, rather. Okay, everyone's doing that? Now I want you to look up. Now I want you to imagine that there is a clock looking down at you. Which way do the hands of a clock move? You can say it. Clockwise. That was a trick question, right? So what I'd like you to do is, with your arm, trace the hands of the clock from 12 to 12 clockwise. If you're confused about what to do, look at me. Just do the reverse, mirror image of what I'm doing. All right? Now continue to look up, and while keeping the rotation going, bring your arm down to the level of your face. Keep looking up. Everybody still continuing to move? Fantastic. Look straight. Don't stop the movement. Now as you look straight, bring your arm down to the level of your chest or your stomach. Now look down. Which way is your hand moving? Counterclockwise. Okay, some people didn't get it. Let's do it one more time. Okay. Hand up. Yeah? Clock looking down at you clockwise. Move, right? Now keep looking up and bring your hand down to the level of your face. Do not change the movement. Just lower your hand. All right, now look straight. Now to the level of your chest or your stomach. And moving counterclockwise? Okay, great. Why? Change of perspective. Thank you. Now, since I did get you to get up, there's a little prize for you. There are a few cupcakes over there. If anybody wants dessert, you can walk over and take those. Right? If you don't want dessert, you can please sit down. Thank you. Right. So now now by the way, you can borrow this and do it in your sessions if you want. There's only one rule. You've got to credit me the first 4 times, and then it's yours. All right? Now, there are 3 reasons why I do this exercise before most sessions that I do. The first one is because it's cool, right? The second one is how often is it that we interact with people, our stakeholders, our colleagues, people that we work with, and we are talking about the same thing, but it feels like we're talking about 2 different things, right? Because you are looking at it from one side, the other person's looking at it literally the exact opposite. So what this helps me do in my discussions often is it helps me get aligned. It reminds me that, oh, wait a minute, I need to get aligned before I start going off on what I need to talk about. So that's the first part. The second part, or the last part about why I do this exercise is really, there are many things that I'm going to talk about today that you probably already know, probably already doing to some degree, right? But I'm going to ask you and challenge you to think about those from a different perspective. And if you get a different response, fantastic, you know what to change. And if you don't get a different response, that's great too. You know what's working, keep going. All right? So that's the reason why I do this exercise before most of my sessions, just to remind ourselves that while we can talk about all of these things, we are often talking with other people who may be seeing this situation entirely differently, and it's important to get aligned, right? Now, as a first step, I want to make some declarations and some definitions. So let's start with the first definition. What is the purpose of L&D? Why do we all exist in our companies? Right? We believe that the fundamental purpose of learning and development is to help people develop skills which, when they apply back to the job, drive both job and organization performance. Is that a reasonable definition? Yeah? Fairly general, but reasonable definition, right? All of you, I see a lot of nods, so that's wonderful. Now I'm going to make a rather uncomfortable declaration next. Many of you may not agree with me, but training or learning does not deliver business results. I'm sorry to say, it doesn't, right? Like I said, many of you may not agree with me with this, but I hope to give you a new perspective over the next 30-odd minutes. Now, what does drive business results is the collective and systematic application of the learning back on the work that really drives business results. So in and of itself, learning does not do anything unless it is followed up with enabling a systematic way to apply those skills back on the job, right? So it is reasonable to therefore say, businesses don't need training, they need the outcomes of training. So we spend a lot of time focusing on the training that we do. We need to shift that focus to say, what are we focusing on really? Because our businesses who hire us, give us jobs and work for their departments, don't need the training. They need the outcomes of training. Right, so now that we've established that it ultimately comes down to business impact, and that's what we are all here to provide and do for our organizations, let's talk a little bit about how we can connect our efforts as L&D professionals to the outcomes that actually matter and impact your organization and its objectives, right? So in order to do this, I'd like to introduce you to a model that we use called the strategic alignment model. We can call it by different names, and you can use this in many different ways. And here it is. All businesses, regardless of industry, regardless of what line of work you're in and what company you work for, all businesses are doing one of 3 things at all times. They're either reacting or responding to a situation in the market, or they are trying to do certain activities to capitalize and get a position and get ahead in the market, right? Is that reasonable to say? Yeah? All right, very good. Now, these market realities tend to define companies' strategies in terms of what are we going to do, how are we going to make this change, and how are we going to capitalize on this, and therefore, what should be our strategy shift, right? This could be a company might choose to offer a new product line, for example, to tap into a new market, or you might look at changes in pricing, positioning in the marketplace, etc. You might even offer an entirely new line of service, whatever that might be, right? You're doing that as a company to tap into a potential that you see, or in response to somebody who's doing it who's a competitor. Now, as a next step, companies often then look at what are some of the structural changes that need to make this for this to happen. Are we set up right for this? If we need to offer a new product line, are we set up well enough to offer the new product line? What do we need? So this could be things like starting a new division, or many of you are always in the form of restructuring or reorganizing and re-something, right? So one of those the reason for that is there is something that is driving that, and that strategy is often a response to something that's going on in the marketplace. And finally, organizations look at people and their ability to execute on the new shift to make it successful. We all know that there was a statistic, I don't know if this is true, so don't quote me on it, about 80% of strategies fail because people are not ready to execute it, right? And now this could be things like you could be hiring for a new capability, like a new skill in the market that you might be adding on, or you might be looking to build existing skills in your existing teams in order to make them proficient. If you're working in a tech company, I know that at least significant amount of your investment went into artificial intelligence training over the past few years, right? And before that, it was digital. And if you're in manufacturing, it probably went towards automation capability and so on and so forth. So you're always looking to see what are those skills that our people need in order to make that strategy a success. Now, a key element in all of these is understanding the business metrics behind each of these, right? Here's where we're really asking, how is the business going to know that they're successful? What are those specific indicators that will let them know that they're being successful, and how do they measure for this success? L&D's biggest opportunity is in ensuring that the people element in this strategy execution plan is strongly linked to the critical business outcomes of all of the other areas, so that you can make sure that you're moving in the right direction to make that strategy a success. Does that make sense? Sure. All right. Now, this framework can be used in a number of ways, like I said. The first way is this is actually a framework that you can use to structure your conversations with business, right? When you're talking to your business leaders, when you're interacting with people inside your client organizations, you can actually use this framework to say, okay, what are you really responding to? If you're telling me that this skill is required, what are we really responding to in the market? What is driving this, and are we set up right for this, right? So if you structure this conversation in that way, often you end up talking about a lot more about what's going on in the business, and therefore soliciting information becomes a lot easier, right? So as we've established, our biggest opportunity is ensuring that we form the critical channel in ensuring that the people element is strongly linked to all of the other key elements of market, strategy, and structure. Now, so the next step we're going to look at is how do we then use all of this to design meaningful learning interventions that actually drive business outcomes. So now we've got all of that information. So at Wilson Learning, we use a model that we call the human performance improvement model, and we've been using it for quite some time to help our customers drive business impact. And I want to share that with you, right? So the first stage in this model is understanding the business drivers, the business strategy shift, and what are the work processes that are currently working and what need changes in your organization. Now the next step is in understanding and using that information to determine what knowledge, skills, and abilities exist and what knowledge, skills, and abilities are required for what we're trying to do. We then work on development, and as we consider development, it is important that we review our tools and processes that we currently have, and working with the businesses that we support, determine which of these existing tools and processes actually are going to work in the new stage, and which need to be changed, and gain alignment and agreement on those before we move any further, right? And therefore, creating the conditions for development to happen successfully and effectively. Now, as we review the tools and processes, we need to look at how well are these tools and processes integrated with measurement and feedback. There is an old saying, if you were from the sales world, you would know. It says, show me how I get paid and I'll show you how I behave, right? And the reason why we say that is because if you are putting people through development activities which have no link back from a tools and processes and usage and language point of view, It's not going to be as effective. Just as simple as that, right? How do they get measured on the new tools and processes, and how do they get feedback on the new tools and processes and how they're doing? I'm sorry, I should click that. Now, ultimately, what we also need to do is to use that to further create alignment for management to coach and support on those new skills as we go along. Now, when we do this, we need to go back to the business and collect information from our business leaders about how all of this is going, which can then feed back into future knowledge, skills, and abilities and additional development as we continue to do that. Now, this all sounds fairly complicated, right? But it's important that you do this, because otherwise we are simply offering learning. And there is a place for that too. There are lots of skills that you will, sorry to use the word, but run-of-the-mill skills that you will need to have, that you need to continuously do. So for example, your calendarized workshops and so on and so forth. What we are talking about here are specific change initiatives that your company is doing in order to be able to drive better business outcomes. That's where we need to be using this, right? And now, as we look at this model, it's easy to look at it and go, okay, we do this 1, 2, 3, 4. This is not a sequential model. The reality is you're doing this all the time. You're doing all of this all the time, right? Because you're always reevaluating what those knowledge, skills, and abilities are. You're always checking if the development is right. You're always looking at what tools and processes can be updated. You're always ensuring that managers need to be aligned in order to provide coaching. And you're always looking at augmenting those tools in ways that can improve efficiency. Does that make sense? Excellent. All right. So now that we've looked at the strategic alignment model and the human performance model, I'll take a sip of water. The next bit we're going to do is look at some research that we did recently. Now, if we are standing here and telling you that it's about driving business outcomes, we wanted to answer the question, well, what should we be doing to drive business outcomes? What are those specific activities that we need to do that have the maximum impact to drive business outcomes? So we did some research. We looked at about over 1,000 different articles. Very few actually had analysis that we needed. So we had to go back and look at more articles. And what we found out was that learning retention and application fell down to 35% or less 12 months after an event. So if you learn something today, you're lucky if you remember 35% of what you did today, right? So we set out to answer the question, well, what are those specific activities that can be included that can actually help us get better results? And what we found was quite interesting. We found that at varying levels, there were 11 factors that contributed the maximum amount to business impact. And broadly classified, those 11 factors, we clubbed them into 3 categories of what we call learner readiness, transfer design, and organizational alignment, right? When combined, the results were actually quite staggering. Here's the good news. When all of these 11 factors are done for any intervention, learning transfer increased by up to 180%. What I mean by that is each one of these factors contributing 10, 15, 20%, if you add all that up, it gets to 180+%. So what does it mean to you if you can double the impact of your learning interventions? That'd be pretty significant, I would imagine, right? Yeah? All right, very good. So let's break this down further and look at what each of these individual categories contain and what were those percentages that were attributed to these areas. I already told you that. All right. So let's look at learner readiness first. When we talk about learner readiness, we're talking about activities like motivating employees to learn, motivating employees to use the skills, aligning learning with career goals, and addressing self-efficacy, which is just a fancy word for confidence of the learners. Now, interestingly, if you look at this, motivating employees to learn has up to a 24%. Now, the yellow dots are averages. The blue scale is the scale. So we looked at numerous studies. This was the stretch. So you got all the way from 0 to 40+%. The average was 24. So we're looking at the averages now. Motivating employees to learn had an impact of about 24%. Motivating employees to use the skills had about 18%. Aligning learning with career goals had a 17%. And addressing self-efficacy had a factor of 11%. What this tells us is collectively, learner readiness activities actually can impact or increase learning transfer by up to 70% collectively, right? So let's take a look at the next area, which is transfer design. Here we are talking about mostly the core of what we do, which is designing the program, designing the implementation, ensuring that there are things that are present in the program, and so on. So here we're talking about creating practice and modeling activities within the learning experience, setting learning goals, and supporting application and use. Now, creating practice and modeling activities contributes 11%, setting learning goals 15%, supporting application and use 11%, right? So transfer design activities collectively can increase learning transfer by 37%. Now, let's look at the final one, which is organizational alignment. And here we're really talking about activities like ensuring that there is manager support and coaching, encouraging peer support, creating a learning culture, and making the skills job relevant, right? Now, as you can see, the percentages are significantly different. Ensuring manager support and coaching has a 26% potential for improvement on an average. Ensuring peer support, 33%. Creating a learning culture, 20%, and making skills job relevant, 13%. Organizational alignment activities can increase learning transfer by up to 92% collectively, right? Now, let's look at how each of these areas of learner readiness, transfer design, and organizational alignment actually link back to the human performance improvement model that I talked about. Remember when we talked about designing the learning intervention with all of those areas in mind? So let's talk about how this links back in. So obviously you've got the business drivers, the business strategy, and the work processes, which we talked about the strategic alignment model can help you provide additional information on. So when we look at information through to development, or a little bit into development, those are typically the learner readiness activities. How are you creating interest? How are you creating conditions under which those skills are going to be used? And how are you encouraging people to actually be ready for what's coming? When we talk about tools and processes, from development onwards to tools and processes to integration with measurement and feedback, that's where we're really talking about transfer design. So really, while transfer design in the way that we look at it actually has a lot of program design elements, it's much more than that in terms of what we actually need to do. It's about looking at tools and processes. How do you integrate what is already going on with your work back into the learning? Or if you're providing them with new tools, how do you integrate it back into the work, right, that they're doing, right? And finally, in terms of organizational alignment, we're looking at it right from the measurement stage, creating alignment and driving management and coaching. At this point, we're really looking at collecting additional information that then feeds back further. So that loop keeps going on and on and on as we continue to develop our workforce, right? Now that we've looked at all of these three models, majority of our time as learning and development professionals tends to be spent in activities around learning, right? So in my conversations with our customers and prospects, we spend a significant amount of time talking about what are the learning elements that are involved. What does the design look like? What's the digital element? What's the experiential element? What kind of exercises are you going to be doing? And so on and so forth. As we just looked at those numbers, transfer design has an average of 37% compared to 70% for learner readiness and 92% for organizational alignment. So this almost points to an 80-20 rule where we seem to spend 80% of our time focusing on what gives us 20% of the impact, right? So that's an interesting observation for me. And outcomes, business outcomes, as it turns out, are often driven by organizational alignment activities, right? So now I know that it's easier said than done, right? So we're not saying that, yeah, now that we've done it, go create organizational alignment. We know it's tough, right? And I've been on your side of the fence too. Now, so let's talk about the typical barriers that you guys experience in creating organizational alignment, right? So you often find that what the organization and the field, which is the participants, require may be two different things, right? I've talked to many sales leaders over the years who say, our teams needs negotiation skills because they see the proposal moving from 0 to 60 in 2 days, and then it gets stuck there for 6 months, and then it goes away, right? So it's easy for them to look at that data and go, that's what I need. But when you dig deeper, you often find that the problem is that they're getting from 0 to 60 very, very quickly, and therefore missing out on a lot of things. So the real need could be something else, like a sales methodology, for instance, right? So that's one of those things that we need to look at. And that's a barrier that we all face. The second barrier is that we have large workforces with varying levels of proficiency, experience, backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So when we try and approach it with a one-size kind of a program, it often limits effectiveness. And we know that happens often to you guys as well. This is really, really important. Your managers either don't, can't, or just simply won't coach, right? And so that creates a further problem. And finally, the environment that you put people back into after you get them, cleaned up, so to speak, in a learning environment, that environment makes it difficult for application and development to happen, right? So you might have a person who went through a leadership program and say, okay, I want to move away from my command and control form of leadership into something better. But the system goes, no, I need those results yesterday. So you got no time to practice. So those are some of the barriers that you guys are experiencing, and we know that. I want to throw this back to you and say, what other barriers can one or two of you share based on your own experience that you've interacted with your business leaders? What else do you hear? No barriers? Yes, ma'am. No time. No time, absolutely. Too busy. Yeah. What else? Yes, sir. Yeah.
So sometimes we talk about managers putting expectations on learners, at the same time not putting expectations on themselves.
Yeah.
So if I've given you 9 things to do, and if I'm asking you to upskill yourself on something, I need to be considerate and give you 8 things to do and free up the 9th element to free you to time of practice.
Absolutely.
So this is my demon on the table.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's wonderful to hear. Yes, ma'am.
I've also observed that manager always says that this is a need of the person.
Yeah.
But nobody has asked the person, what do you think is a need for you?
Right, and that can be a tricky one because a lot of times the organization needs people to do certain things and modify behavior and upskill them, right? So that's driven by the market forces or the strategy that the company has. So sometimes you may not be able to control. Right? So if I don't want to learn about artificial intelligence as a techie, I'm going to be pretty irrelevant very soon. So whether or not I want to at that moment does not make a difference. If I want to stay relevant, then I need to create. However, it's up to the organization to ensure that that relevance is created and by aligning those skills to job performance and future goals and things like that, right? So there is a bit of a nuance there. I agree with you in some cases that is an important element to do. In other cases, sometimes even the managers may not necessarily have a choice about doing that. So I want to just ask you to keep that in mind. Yeah.
Maybe technology-wise,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
When it comes to behavior skills,
Probably.
the manager
Absolutely. Yeah.
different lens than the person himself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that calls for a interesting conversation between the two to really figure out why and what's required. Yes, sir. I'll come to you in just a second. Yeah.
The whole cycle of
Yeah.
this implementation, all the parties who have come together
Yeah.
faster into something.
Yes.
And you don't find a link to be really like the way you will try to bring all these barriers and put it in the last.
Yeah.
The eating of the bone of content of which we started, and it has converted to something, and by the time you want to see who are our stakeholders,
Yeah.
everybody is in different world altogether.
Right. That can also be a barrier. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. You had your question. Yeah.
Yeah, so in addition to what you said, right, the conversation is important.
Yeah.
That is a must. I may have a different aspiration.
Absolutely.
That conversation with my manager, and that brings me to point number 3 that talks about managers don't coach enough, but our managers equip with the required skills.
That's absolutely.
That's very important. And the third point is being aware of what is the organizational goal, what
Yeah.
is the business impact we're talking about.
Absolutely.
I, as a developer or a team lead or a manager, do I know what I'm talking about from a business impact?
Absolutely.
Those conversations never happen. It remains at the
At the thought level.
Right.
Right.
The boardroom, like
Yeah.
discuss,
Absolutely.
down to the next level.
That's a very, very real issue.
Where the mismatch can be.
I agree with you 100%. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to talk about the business impact.
Yeah.
We're talking about how to, what are the barriers to business impact. So if as an L&D professional, you not be able to define the business impact and show to the business how it's ultimately going to get impacted.
Right.
I mean, I think that conversation is important to say, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do, and this is your role in doing it.
Absolutely.
Partner effectively.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, it's a big challenge. Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm going to share some examples of things that went well in our implementations, and you'll find that that's a sort of a common element. I had a hand raised there. Yes. You're right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you, and that's often an issue. One of the things that we find interesting when that happens is changing the question. Not what skills do you need, what is the cost of not having that skill? Can you put a monetary value on it? And if that number is significant, then you will see business leaders jumping, right? So it's also about, and we'll talk more about that in terms of how do we have that discussion. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think there's a mutual fund SIA joke somewhere in there. Yes. Sir. Yeah.
The allocation of the role of L&D in the business impact that was achieved, along with other factors that came into play. It
Yeah.
could be a campaign which was launched,
Yeah.
it could be something else which was done, a structural change in
Yeah.
the software,
Yeah.
and then allocating how much was the role of L&D, because the business result which we were changing was same.
Yeah.
Was one.
Right.
But it has happened through combined effort of multiple departments.
Absolutely.
So putting that allocation to L&D becomes key.
It becomes very critical, and part of that exercise becoming a little bit easier involves all of those entities coming together to form that strategy where you are involved in that right from the beginning, right? So it's not that I'm running a campaign, by the way, here, do these skills. So if that's the approach, then yeah, you're right, it becomes increasingly difficult. So in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of move forward. I think I started late, so I'm good for another 20 minutes, right? All right, so thank you for those responses. And how do we do all of this? And let's talk briefly about that, and I'm happy to continue this discussion with you all afterward at the booth. So we need to take responsibility and look at the three elements of learner readiness, transfer design, and organizational alignment collectively in the approach to creating business impact, and really work with our businesses, like we said, to define what is the cost of not having that skill in that moment. What is the business really bleeding? And if it is, then what is the investment that the business, in terms of its leaders, its other stakeholders, are willing to make? Not just in money, but in time, energy, and effort in order to be able to rectify that problem. So ultimately, if we keep these three things in mind and use the strategic alignment model to really drive the conversation that we have with our businesses, we will make significant strides in delivering business value. I gave you some good news about doubling return. Now some not so good news. I'm sorry to say there's no trick here. There's no magic bullet. There's nothing that you can simply pull out of a hat and do and immediately drive business impact, right? Driving business impact requires a systemic approach. The right things need to be done right, at the right time in order for that to be effective. Now, one sort of a tip, if you will, in terms of your own way to approach businesses is I'd like to use the analogy of a bicycle. So a lot of this stuff depends on how we approach our business and have those discussions as well, right? So I'd like to use the analogy of a bicycle. Everybody ridden a bicycle in your life at some point? Yeah, some of you still ride it for exercise purposes and things like that, and that's wonderful, right? Now, the bicycle, I love this analogy because it's so apt. Bike has two wheels, right? Each of those wheels perform different functions. The rear wheel is sort of the engine for the bike. That's where the energy comes from, that's where the power comes from, that's what pushes you forward. The front wheel provides you with direction. Often, it needs to guide where your back wheel goes, right? Now, if I equate this to the focus in which we approach our business issues and the way we want to create business impact, we can talk about the back wheel being functional focus, right? We know design, we know development, we know competencies. That's what gets us our job, and that's what allows us to move forward into our companies to make a difference. But the business focus, in terms of your own discussions with your leaders, is what directs where your functional focus is utilized to the maximum, and therefore provides you with the biggest business results and better outcomes. Does that make sense? All right, thank you. So here's a couple of stories that I want to tell you about successful implementations that we have done, and some of you talked about measurement. One of the things that we do at Wilson Learning is that all of our interventions have an impact evaluation at the end of it. That's just standard offering. Whether you want to or not, we do it. If you want it, we'll give it to you, right? So here's a few stories that I wanted to share with you. I'm sorry, the text is really bad, but I'll talk you through it. A global circuit board manufacturer, achieved about 24% increase in revenue through improved negotiations. Here's how they did it. They obviously bought a program from us, which everybody does. But the key elements of the implementation were as follows. The leadership team, the sales managers, the sales executives, and the salespeople all went through the program first, starting with the leaders. We had to create coaching playbooks for the managers. The VPs or the sales leaders created situations under which those needed to be reported back to the managers, to the leaders. We created reinforcement and on-the-job application activities that were delivered through a learning portal, which were all tracked and reported back to leadership on a bi-weekly basis. Every 2 weeks, they would get a report. And then it was up to the leadership and in partnership with us to see whether they want to use the carrot or the stick or anything in between to get things moving again, right? And I will tell you, during this intervention, there were slip-ups. But having that feedback loop continuously allows for conversations to keep going. And the other thing that we did was the workshop that we did has its own tools, right? If you're teaching somebody to negotiate, you need to give them some tools to negotiate. Some of those were integrated back into their CRM system as language that they then need to use. So if you went through the program, when you came back, the system, the organization was talking the same language as that. So by doing this and ensuring that there was strong leadership buying, to your point from earlier, we were able to drive 24% improvement in revenue. Now, this is a story from outside India, the one that I just told you. Here's one from Bangalore. There was a global travel technology company. Well, there still is a global travel technology company. They're very much alive. They're still very much our customers. They were able to improve the productivity of their high potentials by about 26% overall, right? Here's, again, key elements from that. Leadership involvement, strong career conversations that were had with managers, which we designed for them in order to be able to have with the high potentials, and those were driven by not their managers, but the managers of their managers, right? Again, we provided coaching tools for the managers of the high potentials to use on a regular basis. We had real-life practice exercises and post-learning exercises where managers were giving regular feedback, and again, all of those were tracked and reported back into the organization. And when we went back to the participants and their managers about the impact that the program had, or the series of programs, this was more of a learning journey, they collectively came back and said there was up to about 26% productivity increase. Now, this is not just the participants talking, but this is also their managers talking, right? And finally, there's another IT company here in India, again, in Bangalore. They attributed $2.1 million to revenue from delivery leaders in increasing business from existing accounts. So previous to the intervention, the delivery leaders simply believed that their job was to deliver on the service level agreements that they had agreed on, and also to present technical part of the solution when they were required. But the organization saw a huge opportunity to say, if we were spending that much time with the customer during delivery, why are we not able to generate additional revenue and identify new requirements? So here are some of the things that we did. First of all, the entire leadership team, and this was for a senior group of directors. So the VPs and the SVPs had to go through the program in a condensed form, so they knew what was happening. They had the buy-in. We were very clearly able to define what the cost was of not doing this and what level of opportunity loss, which meant business leaders obviously paid attention. Again, we created coaching tools for managers, and they were supposed to coach and report back to the leaders. And remember, the leaders are the VPs and the SVPs. So the very senior level people agreed to coach regularly over here. And one of the things that we did was we linked what they were learning and what they were expected to use to the customer value chain that the organization already had, where they genuinely believed their part was only in 2 areas. By linking every single element of the learning outcome back into that customer value chain, we increased that to about 8 or 10 different places where they can actually make an impact to their customer. Again, what does this do? It gives excitement to the participants to say, oh my God, we can affect so many things. But it also gets the leadership to go, oh, wait a minute, these are the opportunities that people have, so let's pay some more attention to it. And every single participant was asked to identify a project, select it after the workshop, communicate it to their leaders, and follow through with the presentation after 3 months. When we went and did the impact evaluation, because there was revenue numbers, we also do a revenue attribution. We collectively, about 30 directors, this implementation is still going on, by the way, we're covering the entire organization. About a group of 30 leaders said that they had an impact of over $2.1 million in a span of about 3 to 4 months from existing accounts where opportunities were not identified before. All right, so now those were some of the ways in which we have driven business impact for our customers, and by following the same process, right? You can do that too internally for your own interventions that you're doing. Now, those 11 factors that I talked to you about, you're never really going to use all of them, right? But if you use some of them, that still contributes to significant impact depending on your intervention, what are you looking at, and what are you trying to achieve. Right, so you will see a QR code on your tables. What I'd like you now to do is to scan that, and it'll take you to an audit, or you can scan this. Let me get out of the way, sorry. You can scan this on the screen as well. Now, it'll take you to an audit which asks you 12 questions. These 12 questions cover the elements of learner readiness, transfer design, and organizational alignment. So here's what I'd like you to do over the next couple of minutes. Think about a recent implementation that you did in your organization, a recent learning intervention, something pretty significant. Keeping that in mind, I'd like you to answer these questions, these 12 questions over the next 2 minutes. Now, when you're opening the QR code, you will be given 2 options of view PDF or open. Please click on open and download the file, because that then is an editable form. Otherwise, it's just a static PDF. And we have some copies in case you guys have issues with scanning. Please raise your hand. We have paper copies. Ishita, thank you. And here as well, please. Yeah, internet would be bad, so we came prepared with some low-tech options. I think we just leave some on each table. Can I help? Oh, okay. Probably, because when we tested it, it was working. But please use the paper for now, and you can download that later on when you get better connectivity. I'm sorry about the internet issues. All right, so here's what I'd like you to do. 2 minutes, quickly think about it and answer those questions. And on the second page of that, there is a score, sort of a scorecard. Depending on the score, it gives you some inputs on what you can do. If you've not got your paper yet, please raise your hand. We should be coming around to give you some. I've been told I have 5 more minutes. So if you've done the scoring, then what I'd like you to do at your tables very quickly, if 1 or 2 of you can share a good example of a particular activity done well in this intervention, please share it. So not only are you listening to and learning from me, but you can also learn from each other and take this last few minutes to do that. So please feel free to talk at your tables for the next couple of minutes. And I have a few more things to say before I wind up. So please, for the next 2 minutes or 3 minutes, please take the time to discuss at your table one particular key thing that you did really well in this implementation that gave you good traction or good results. This requires some talking. Just it is, it can be. But I just want to get used to having the discussion, get you to start having the discussion now. Obviously, you're going to have a greater discussion with your colleagues when you get back to work. Right, oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. No, if there is some, everybody doesn't have to have one, but even if there are 1 or 2 people who have one, that'll be great, just to get you to talk about it. Or something that you did that didn't work. That's good learning too. Yeah, sure, why not? Since I had time to prepare, I picked the nice ones to share with you. Okay, there's a lot of silence. Yeah, I see a few people talking. You guys are rather quiet back there. All right, I'll give you a couple of more minutes to finish your discussions. I'm sorry I'm pushing you. All right, 1 more minute. All right. Thank you for having the discussion. I'm really sorry to cut you off and ask you to cut your conversation short. Like I said, I'm happy to talk to you for till late evening if you need to about any of this stuff, and so is our members of our team. But yes, see, of course, yeah.
These are, of course, derived from those key parameters.
Yes, absolutely.
All those parameters, there were weightages, there were percentages.
Right.
So why in this you have not attached weighted average
Oh.
to have a better
Thank you. I'll take that as feedback and put that in. But really, the idea is not so much to evaluate which activity gives you slightly better results, but to really look at this more holistically to say, can we do as many of these things as possible so that we can increase better outcomes, right? So a couple of things. So earlier I said, one of the questions that you might have was, what is Wilson learning, right? So we are a learning services company. We are a 57-year-old organization. I think we're among the oldest existing in the world right now. We're present in about 60 countries. Our solutions are offered in about 35 different languages. We specialize in 3 areas of sales effectiveness, leadership effectiveness, and customer experience, right? And our mission from day one has always been helping organizations achieve performance with fulfillment. Now, here are some of our awards. I'll skip through that. But here's the interesting thing. One last thing that I'll say. Over the past 8 years, Wilson Learning has been doing research on leadership trends, going around the world and asking questions from learning professionals and other leaders about the requirement for leadership trends. For the first time in those 8 years, we have enough data from India to actually do an India and Asia specific webinar for you, and that's scheduled on the 27th of July with the head of our research, Dr. Michael Leimbach, myself, and Mr. David Yesford, who's our Senior VP for Global Marketing. So the 3 of us are going to be sharing those results. You can scan this QR code and register yourself. We also have one at the booth. Please do scan and register yourself if you're interested. We've made those Americans wake up really early for this, and because I said I'm not doing a webinar at 2 o'clock my time, so they were kind enough to wake up at 4 to do that, all right? So please feel free to join us. Once again, thank you so much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to be here and answer them. But in the interest of time, if you are comfortable with what we've talked about so far and don't have any questions, thank you so much for attending. It was lovely talking to all of you, and I hope we can interact again soon. Thank you so much. Thank you.